Thank you very much. Colleagues, I know it's a fag end of the day. There is, Shailendra was asking me for my disclosure trials. I have this much to disclose. I probably sleep with every pharma company in this hall, and all that I say is probably influenced by everything that they do. So, where are we here? When we talk about GLP-1 agonists, over a period of time, we have realized that they are great in terms of a modest reduction in HbA1c. They're fairly well tolerated. They do not improve pancreatic beta cell mass. They're probably cardiovascular neutral and are probably great agents to take up this first injectable space when you want to consider injectable therapies. And when you look at drugs, so what is the one barrier that prevents us from using many of these drugs so much is this fear of the unknown. This fear whether we are looking at drugs that are probably unsafe simply because they are ubiquitously present. And second, are they going to be sustainable over a period of time? So here you have this slide that tells you what are the concerns that we have with various anti-hyperglycemic agents. The most important one being, of course, hyperglycemia, which can kill more than hyperglycemia does, and which is something that is not of a big concern with a GLP-1 agonist. Weight gain is definitely not a concern simply because most of these agents, especially the injectable GLP-1s, actually cause weight loss. Hypersensitive and allergy is a theoretical concern with all GLP-1 receptor agonists. Remember that we are creating something that works against the body and it's a protein. Therefore, antibodies are something that you want to think about. The question is whether these antibodies are going to be a deterrent to the medication. Second, with all the GLP-1s, the issue is the big GI side effects. Are they going to be another glutide or are they vomiglutides? These are stuff that we want to think about. With all these agents, of course, there's this theoretical increase in cancers. And since the rosiglitazone fiasco, we have considerably been looking at whether these drugs are cardiovascular safe. And I will spend time on this, and I promised Dr. Zargat that I'll give him plenty of time for discussion. As a class, GI-related events are the most frequent adverse events in this class and are probably the only reason why you have patients discontinuing the drugs in this class. The lower the dose, the lesser the nausea. The higher the dose, the greater the nausea. But the nausea is significant across and consistent across the shorter and longer acting. But what is very interesting, at least with the dulaglutide, is that the nausea is comparable to lira and not to vomiglutide. Not semaglutide, where semaglutide has a much higher incidence of vomiting. Injection site reactions and headaches are also seen, but the injection site reactions are much lesser with the dula as compared to exenatide, where you had these microparticles that were there. All the adverse events are non-significant but are fairly mild to moderate. And at least in the Award 1, Award 2 trial, there was one episode of, and in the one when compared with the sitagliptin arm had 2 episodes of pancreatitis. These drugs will, over a long run, used consistently. The risk of pancreatitis is not unknown, but at this point of time we have the ADA and the AEM and the EMA guideline that sort of reassures us on these. So let's spend some more time on this. Let's talk about hyperglycemia. The risk of hyperglycemia is exceptionally nice. One of the things that I like about the award trials is, especially when they have compared it with liraglutide, they've not looked at liraglutide as 1.2, they've looked at liraglutide as 1.8, which means that you're looking at the highest dose of liraglutide that's in the market, along with dulaglutide and the A1C reductions. So if the question is, if you're using 1.2, would this have been not just non-inferior, which would have been superior, is the question that we would like to ask. But look at this. This is the rate of hyperglycemia. The red is the dulaglutide and the black is lira. And you will show that the risk of hyperglycemia is much lower, and this is the Award 6 trial. Then this is the Award 1 and the Award 3 trials. And you look at this carefully. This is 1.5 milligrams of dula, 0.75 of dula. This is exenatide. and this is placebo. This is the Award 3 trial, again looking at metformin. Not really statistically significant, but some of you might notice that the 1.5 had a lower incidence of hypoglycemia. That's not statistically significant. This is looking with liraglutide and comparators. This is 1.2 milligrams, 1.8 milligrams. This is, of course, glimepiride, which you expect it to be higher. This is metformin in combination. This is net plus SU. So the big message that we can take home is this, that with the long-acting GLP-1 RAs, especially dulaglutide, the risk of hyperglycemia is quite low. Let's look at the GI side effects, and I think that's very important. On this, you have exenatide and lixisenatide. This is, you have all the long-acting agents, and you will find that all of them have nausea. They're generally mild to moderate, up to 20 to 40%, and in most studies, the nausea is the most important reason for people to not take the drug or get out. Remember, though, that with liraglutide, and most of us use liraglutide at 0.6 milligrams per day, you go into it for a week. If the patient continues to tolerate it, you up-titrate it to 1.2, and then most of us up-titrate it another couple of weeks or 3 weeks to 1.8. With the Dula, you're going to be starting off on the trot, simply because the nausea attenuates fairly very quickly. This is probably a feature of the length of the action of the drug, but then we can talk about it more. So just to show you that this is a lead 6 study, this is a duration. Remember that you're looking at different studies, at different populations, different baseline A1Cs, all of that, but having seen that participants having nausea is pretty much the same across the board, probably a little lower with Dula, but let's look at this. This is dulaglutide 1.5 and 1.8 of Lira in the Award trial. Remember, there's a higher incidence of nausea initially, and then sort of abates over a period of time to almost less than 5 to 6% of the total population. And these graphs are pretty much falling on each other. So once a day liraglutide versus once a week dulaglutide, the incidence of nausea is pretty much the same. It's very interesting, and it's very nice, because those of you who've done the semaglutide trial will know that with sema, the nausea is much higher in the once a week preparation. I think, Ajay, you've done some of this. Okay, so nausea is mild or moderate in nature. The episodes of nausea were first reported the first 2 weeks of treatment and then declined over 4 weeks. And in the clinical pharmacological studies, which I have no knowledge of, most GI studies affected occurred during the first 2 to 3 days of the initial dose and declined with subsequent doses. Okay. And in all these trials, you'll find that about less than 2% of the whole population withdrew because of nausea. This is not statistically significant, but in fact, it was still the most important reason why people withdrew. Okay, this is looking at other things. This is nausea, this is vomiting. Dulaglutide 1.5 milligrams, 0.75 milligrams versus exenatide. I think that's comparing apples and oranges, but just remember that the incidence of vomiting is quite low. This is looking at this versus sitagliptin, which is an interesting comparison. Mala spent some time on the sita comparisons. You will find that the adverse events are somewhat higher, and this is true, than sita in terms of the GI side effects, except the pancreatitis effects, which are higher with sita, which I'll show you shortly. This is looking at all of them. This is the Harmony 3 trial, but this is with albiglutide, and you will notice that again, the nausea is higher in the injectables, but that's something you expect. Okay, so how do you take care of nausea? The one product that we are all experienced with, I think two. One is exenatide, the other is Lira. The simplest way to have patients take the drug despite the side effect is to be warning them of the side effect. Whether it is an SGLT2 where you tell them you can get genital infections, or whether it is a GLP-1 receptor agonist, if you tell them they're going to get nausea, they usually tolerate it, which means that they're not going to, they know, okay, my doctor has warned me, you're going to say, look, you're going to have nausea, this is going to be somewhat uncomfortable to you, but this is going to go away for most of you in 3 to 4 weeks. If it doesn't go away, or if it's very severe, call me and then we'll think of alternatives. This is the best way to treat the nausea, because once you're forewarned, then patients actually take this quite well. A majority of our patients who are taking GLP-1 receptor agonists are obese, and for them there's a big motivation for them to keep taking it. So if you tell them that this is an expected side effect, then that's probably the best way to treat it. I have never used an antiemetic in any of these patients. Most of them do fairly well. All right? There are these other stuff that people have talked about, reducing portion size, which is a good idea. It reduces your weight. Increasing fluid intake, I don't know how well it works. And I've never prescribed an antacid, but you can do it. What about pancreatitis? I think this is the big buster. It has been debated ad nauseum. It has been talked about by Butler et al. On one side. There's another group on the other side. And let us sort of face the fact that do these drugs as a whole class, DPP-4s and GLP-1 receptor agonists, are some of your patients, when you use a lot of them, going to have pancreatitis? Yes. Are these going to be caused by the drug? We don't know. Is that a reason not to prescribe these drugs? Probably not. But if somebody who's got a gallstone cholelithiasis, with a terminal GB stone, or a calculus in the pancreas, or previous histories of pancreatitis, are these good candidates for the drug? The answer is also no. So if you choose patients carefully, you probably reduce the risk. This is the first part. Second is, remember that a lot of people talk to me about measuring lipases and amylases in patients who are on GLP-1 receptor agonists. The answer is all of these drugs. You will have marginal elevations in lipases and amylases throughout. And none of them has been shown to be significant. So measuring lipases and amylases, do they predict the occurrence of pancreatitis? No. The only way you will know that your patient has got pancreatitis is when you get the phone call from the emergency room saying so-and-so has come in with abdominal pain. So that's something that you need to know, need to live with, and this thing. Having said that, in all these studies, the risk of pancreatitis has been exceptionally low. One case in one of these trials. In another study, there was a patient, the award won. There was a patient who died of pancreatic cancer 9 months after stopping dulaglutide, and it was not attributed as causal, but this is something that happened. So just to look at, this is Dula 1.5, this is Sita, this is placebo. Lipase, pancreatic lipase, median lipase is slightly higher. A total amylase is slightly higher. With abnormal lipases, remember the numbers are fairly matched, 43, 36, 12 and 10, and greater than 3 times the upper limit of normal, around 6.5% of patients here, and about 0.7 had an amylase that is elevated. But none of these led to pancreatitis. So remember that the lipase elevation itself does not help you. And there were no cases of adjudicated pancreatitis reported in patients treated with dulaglutide. The Sita arm did have a couple of pancreatitis. What about the other safety measures? I don't know if I have a slide we don't have a slide here on the calcitonin levels. Needless to say, the calcitonin controversy has been sort of settled. Even with Lira, there have been enough number of adjudications that have been done, showing that this medullary carcinoma signal is sort of purely in rats and not in human beings. So that's something that's been settled. But let's look at the other ones. Renal impairment with GLP-1 RA has been reported, usually in association with hypovolemia, nausea, and dehydration. Remember, be careful with renal impairment. I'll talk to you about the hepatic and the renal studies. Remember that you will notice that the PK is unchanged, but the number of patients with hepatic or renal failure in the Dula studies were low enough so that you can't really jump with excitement and say use it in all of them. So you have to use it with caution. Remember that exenatide cannot be given in patients with a creatinine clearance of less than 30. Let's look at this carefully. This is a renal impairment study. You will see that the PK is pretty much the same, whether it's ESRD, whether it is control or mild impairment. But again, be careful because the number of patients in all these studies with renal impairment was very, very low. Similarly with hepatic impairment, and you will notice that the control is better, but in childs B and C, there's not much of a difference. Again, I would be very careful in choosing a drug like this in patients with hepatic or renal impairment. I think that's a fairly good statement to stay. CV outcomes. I think we need to wait for the big study that is going to come. That will be published in 2019. The answer from all the trials put together is the cardiovascular, the odds ratio is around 0.87. And I think that's something that we've seen consistently across the trials. We haven't seen any signals for heart failure with the GLP-1 RAs. But then, we haven't seen any prospective trials that have come out that looked at that particular part. Remember, there have been studies of lixisenatide to be used in patients who have an acute MI and showing that LV function improves. But having said that, remember the DPP-4s have at least 2 trials and probably a 3rd trial that says that patients can get admitted for significant heart failure. But that signal has not been seen with the GLP-1 RAs, but always remember that piece of information when you're using it in high-risk patients. Having said that, if you look at all the trials put together, the OR is about 0.87. The REWIND is a trial that wait for another 5 years, and maybe in another Diabetes India we can talk about it some years down. So let's put this in perspective. So we have a drug that's once a week, that's convenient, causes nausea, but most patients get over it. No events of pancreatitis reported, but be cautious. Convenient to use. The one concern that I had with this drug was, the dispenser is so beautiful that people will start keeping it in their mantelpieces. I hope they find a way to discard it biologically well. But otherwise, the data looks impressive. The adverse events are low. And what would be interesting is to see how we can place it in practice with all our experts out here. I turn this table on to Dr. Zargar and my other colleagues to continue the discussion. And I've given him a solid 8 minutes more to discuss. Thank you so much.